In the summer of 1940, the terrible might of the German Air Force, just 20 miles across the Channel, was poised to crush Great Britain beneath its iron heel. Outnumbered and outgunned, a handful of British airmen joined battle in the skies over Reede in a conflict that would decide their country's fate and dramatically alter the whole course of the Second World War. This is the story of what came to be called the Battle of Britain. It all began on that fateful day in 1938, when the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, a nice man but a naive politician, signed a treaty with a man called Hitler that promised us all peace forevermore.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine.
So that was all right then. Nothing more reassuring than a treaty with a man you can trust. The next summer, millions of Britons holidayed in the sun, blissfully unaware that the shadow of war was creeping ever closer. For out there, beyond the horizon, the lights had gone out in a small country called Czechoslovakia. Poland would be next, and if it fell, Britain would be at war. Without warning, the Nazi war machine struck at the heart of Poland. In Warsaw, the capital city, terror fell from the skies. And far away, when the news reached London, the Prime Minister spoke to the nation.
I am speaking to you in the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
But as the troops marched off to their training camps, life in Britain resumed its leisurely tempo. The workforce surged along the same streets. The harvest was gathered under benign skies. But was it a fool's paradise? For the swastika moved ever nearer. Hitler himself had come to Warsaw to gloat over a great city in its death throes. He'd begun to collect whole countries. Poland and Czechoslovakia were already in his pocket. Next on his list, Holland, Denmark, Belgium, and France. And then, separated from Europe by just 20 miles of sea, the greatest prize of all, England. The British had begun to take this war more seriously. They knew that the Channel wouldn't protect them against bombers, so they started building air raid shelters in city parks. The growing certainty that the Germans would bomb London and other cities meant that children had to be evacuated. In just 1 week, nearly 1.5 million children were moved to safer homes in the country. It was a deep emotional shock for some children, so to reassure them, the government sent along the most famous mother in the land.
Her Majesty goes down to the country to see how London's evacuated children are getting along. She finds them healthy, happy, and above all, extremely busy. With the Minister of Education, Lord Delaware, Her Majesty makes a tour of the village. Better look behind you, Sonny, there's the Queen coming down the garden path. And Sonny has only just realized it.
The young men who joined up with dreams of glory were quickly disillusioned. For the first 10 weeks, they were drilled like convicts doing hard labor. The only relief from square bashing being the indifferent canteen food. The training of fighter pilots was given urgent priority. They were young men who combined a quiet but deeply felt patriotism with a burning desire for adventure. Most of them were public schoolboys.
If you find that the machine is turning to starboard, then you apply a little starboard engine and so exert a force on that side to draw the aeroplane out.
They knew that when this training was over, they'd be flung into the sky against the most powerful air force on Earth. Meanwhile, even park railings were being fed into the war effort. Fed to metal-hungry munitions factories in what had become a desperate race against time. For the frightening truth was, Britain may have declared war, but she was in no shape to fight one. The Nazi enemy had been given a flying start by the policy of appeasement, which had left Britain in 1939 practically defenseless. The great opponent of appeasement, Winston Churchill, reported on an army exercise in which an officer had been thrilled to command as many as 12 tanks. What a pygmy force with which to repel the imminent Hun. Already London was looking like a city that expects to be under siege. The barbed wire barriers that went up in public squares would hardly have deterred a German panzer. They did, however, find a use for them that revealed the darker face of patriotism, as confinement camps for resident aliens.
Gas masks on, 5 minutes, please.
Even this demure office routine had to be broken by essential preparations for the worst possible eventuality. The War Office was convinced that, as in the First World War, the Germans would use gas.
Do you find that you can work quite well in your mask?
Yes, quite easily.
And it's quite comfortable, is it?
Yes, you soon get used to it.
That's good. Now, don't forget to wipe your mask after you've used it. Dry the inside.
If there were an invasion, the last line of defense would be the Home Guard, seen here through the home movie lens of Rosie Newman, a young Londoner who filmed her own record of the war. A dad's army they may have been, but they were limbering up for a battle that seemed only weeks away. The Nazi tide was sweeping westwards across Europe. When Holland was threatened, hundreds of Dutch families who couldn't bear the thought of living under a tyranny boarded getaway ships that were bound for England. They'd left everything behind except for their clothes and their courage. This shipload of refugees came under attack from German dive bombers. Yet somehow they made it to safe harbor. Made it under British escort that was secure enough for a young princess to be given a privileged view of Dover's white cliffs. First off the ship were the most distinguished of refugees, the Dutch royal family. Leading the way, Queen Wilhelmina, with Princess Juliana and her husband, Prince Bernhard. And behind their royal family, in every sense of the word, came ordinary Dutch citizens. The unwanted and the persecuted, Jews and Gentiles. Those who'd chosen exile so that they could hold their heads high in a foreign land. People with the same indomitable pride as Britain's new leader. For Chamberlain had gone and Winston Churchill had replaced him. Cometh the hour, cometh the man. In the autumn of his life, Churchill had found his moment of destiny.
I would say to the House, as I said to those who have joined the government, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. We have before us an ordeal of the most grievous kind. We have before us many, many long months of struggle and of suffering. You ask, what is our policy? I will say, it is to wage war by sea, land, and air, with all our might, with all the strength that God can give us, to wage war against a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark and lamentable catalogue of human crime. That is our policy. You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word, victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be.
May 1940. The roar of the English lion was heard in Paris. But most Frenchmen believed that Britain didn't have a prayer. In the city, there was an atmosphere of feverish anxiety. Police checked everybody in case they were fifth columnists. There were rumors that the Germans were planning another of their sneak attacks. The rumors were true. This was a new kind of warfare, with Stuka dive bombers used as a kind of flying artillery. France's elaborate defense system, built so proudly, was smashed to pieces. Now, in her island fortress, Britain summoned men of arms to go to the aid of their French ally. So for the second time in a generation, British soldiers said goodbye to wives and sweethearts as they went off to do battle. The second British Expeditionary Force, like their fathers in 1914, were off to fight the Germans in the fields of France. They had no way of knowing what disaster lay ahead of them. Yet here, only 100 or so miles away, was the terrible evidence of what German military power could do. Nazis had coined a new word for it: Blitzkrieg. Unblooded British troops walked straight into the chaos that was France. And everywhere they went, they found themselves marching against a flood tide of refugees. Soon they would realize why they were heading north while the refugees were all fleeing south. A few days before, British armoured vehicles had been welcomed by neutral Belgium as they took a shortcut to the French heartland. The Germans, however, had anticipated the move, and now their much more powerful armoured corps punched a hole through Belgium. As the Germans drew a steel noose around border towns, the British were not only outflanked, they were in serious danger of having their escape route to the sea completely cut off. British and French troops destroyed bridges as they fell back, but the Germans had come prepared. They'd brought lightweight, high-powered landing barges with them and simply motored across the rivers at points where they were unprotected. When French forces retreated underground, German commandos moved in and dispatched those sheltering inside with ruthless precision. Then, spurred on by dive bombers, cold-bloodedly but efficiently, whole populations were driven out. The battle was already lost. The British army was in retreat. But how could it escape? The word had gone out to every small boat owner in England. We need you to get our men off the beaches at a place across the channel called Dunkirk. So began the 9 days and nights of Operation Dynamo. Under a black shroud from burning oil tanks, the British Navy, with the invaluable help of that armada of small craft, began the great liftoff. Winston Churchill had been told that only 40,000 troops were likely to be rescued. In the event, 340,000 men would make it back to England. No wonder Churchill's voice rang out with proud defiance.
The Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be freed, and the life of the world may move forward into broad, sunlit upland. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duty. So bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its commonwealths last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
Britain now stood alone, with the world's mightiest military power just across the Channel in what had become occupied France. But where was that threatened invasion? So far, all that the barbed wire at Dover Beach had caught were a few fish. When would the storm break? The first attack on British soil would not come from the air, as expected, but from a long-range German cannon. For Dover, target of the attack, it was the beginning of a virtual siege that would last for 4 years. Ironically, the first civilian casualties of the Battle of Britain would come from shell fire, not from bombs. now on it was instant alert. But defending 2,000 miles of British coastline was an impossible mission. There were a few forts on stilts, and a British boffin came up with the notion of using pools of burning oil, but the chances of them stopping a German battleship seemed frankly laughable. But they did burn with a lovely patriotic flame. And so did the Pathé newsreel commentator when he sang a hymn to our coastal watchdogs.
Come the three corners of the world in arms, and we shall shock them. Naught shall make us rue if Britain to itself do rest but true. Britons will look with pride upon these scenes of our steel-girt shores. Europe's freedom now rests in the strong hands of the British Commonwealth of Nations, entrusted with the noble duty of saving all free men from Nazi serfdom. By strength of arms, we will destroy the evil thing and emerge victorious in a noble cause.
Then, one eventful morning, a radio operator picked up a signal. The bombers were coming. It was the start of a day that no one involved would ever forget. When it was over, they counted the cost. The figures were amazing. The vaunted Nazi Air Force had lost 2 planes for every 1 British plane. What was more, 16 airmen of the master race had been picked out of the sea. But others would replace them. There would be more raids.
Britain
gets another foretaste of aerial attack. This time Nazi bombs are dropped on a northeast coast town. But fortunately, again, there are very few casualties. 8 civilians are wounded, the first bomb casualties in England. There's quite a big crater, hundreds of broken windows and a good deal of damage. One little girl slept right through the raid and woke up afterwards to find her bed littered with pieces of a bomb. Here she is. Soon British fighters roared up to meet the raiders and the Germans bolted. They always do. The Germans have made another of their typical attacks on unfortified positions, a poultry farm in Sussex. But you have to admit that this one was a Nazi bomber in difficulties with our fighters and anti-aircraft guns. So in order to make a quicker getaway, he dropped his bombs, and they landed on the chicken farm. It's hard luck for the chickens, but fortunate that no one else was hurt by the big explosion. And now Pathé Gazette presents an exclusive interview with some of the survivors.
There was better news down south. The Italian Air Force had launched an air raid on a British airbase, and their planes had been knocked out of the sky like clay pigeons. It would be the first and last Italian air raid, an altogether inglorious experience for a captured Italian airman who was paraded through remarkably polite English crowds. And one of the British heroes of the day reminded us of his score. An all-round good show.
And can they show the young'uns a thing or two?
The Home Guard continued to patrol, for the invasion was still expected. And since this volunteer army was being loosely prepared for combat, they were entitled to extra rations. They ate food fit for fighting men, didn't they? The anonymous heroes of this war were the 13 million British housewives who queued for hours almost every day to keep the fires burning on the home front, while keeping one hand free to protect the children.
It wasn't themselves they cared about, always the children first. There was fear.
Many of them had had to send their children away, ticketed and labeled, to live with strangers, in order to keep them safe from falling bombs.
Loneliness and the horrors of war from the air. For Britain's women, war meant a lifetime of strain and worry. Rations, points, coupons, the daily problem of meals, with food that was scanty and dreary. The never-ending search for little luxuries, the pleading with shopkeepers. The housewives had none of the compensations of war, travel, companionship, a few days' leave. There was no escape from the dull, endless monotony of the household round. Years of washing up, of scrubbing and cleaning, of patching and making do. No medals, no mentions in dispatches. They just kept on writing, everything's all right at home. The women made the best of it, and when there wasn't enough to go round, it was the women who went without.
Some mothers who'd sent their children to America were able to talk to them.
Looking frightfully excited. Go ahead, Mrs. Furner.
Hello, John, darling.
Hello.
How are you?
All right, thank you. I weigh 90 pounds now.
Do you? That's splendid, isn't it?
Yes.
John, here's your daddy practically chewing the microphone to get in. I'm just finishing 7 days' leave, John. Would it be nice to have your bedtime this time?
Yes.
Can you talk away, John? You used to talk plenty of time. Mummy wanted to do it all this time, yeah?
It was 28 below yesterday.
Beg pardon?
It was 28 below.
That's a long way down, isn't it?
Yes.
German bombers suddenly struck London with dreadful force.
Night fell illuminated a wide section of London. Nazi airmen, without a shadow of doubt, could have picked out other targets of military importance. But the Royal Air Force and our ground defences were inflicting heavy losses on the attacking air armadas, as many as 99 enemy raiders being brought down in one day. In their rage at these blows at their air might, the Nazis threw off all pretense of confining themselves to military targets, and the following pictures show that bombs have been scattered over London without any distinction of military objectives. In the East End, much damage has been done to business premises and homes. And the morning after this occurred, the German communique said that they attacked targets of military importance. Military importance? Look at it! In a West London district, some houses and a block of flats were struck. Targets of military importance, my foot! a bus was blown over like a kid's toy by a bomb which burst across the road. A tram, too. Is a London tramcar of military importance? Any war the Hun has ever fought has been aimed chiefly at the civilian. The coward always attacks the weak.
Londoners responded to this brutal assault on their city with calm stoicism. Indeed, the psychiatric clinics the government had set up to handle stress had to be closed down for want of patients. The suicide rate dropped by 100%. After all, your life must have value if someone's trying so hard to take it from you. These RAF fighter pilots look relaxed, but the stress of combat flying around the clock with almost no sleep was beginning to tell. The German attacks were intensifying.
On the word scramble, they're in the cockpits of their Spitfires and Hurricanes before you can say Bob's your uncle. There's a job of work for these pilots, and boy do they love their work. Way up in the sky, there are Messerschmitts, Junkers, Heinkels, or Dorniers that are going to get the thrashing of their lives. Here they come, Jerry, you rotten swastinkers, you.
The commentator made it sound like a boy's own paper adventure, but for the men in the sky, it was a terrifying, deadly business. The clashes between British Spitfires and Hurricanes and the German Messerschmitt 109s were an epic contest. To the shock and dismay of the Luftwaffe, the Messerschmitt, despite its greater speed, was consistently outmaneuvered by both British fighters. The British airmen's strike rate was still 2 kills for every German one. The problem was the Germans seemed to have an inexhaustible supply of men and planes. It was a problem, naturally, that the newsreels couldn't touch on.
The Germans have lost 1 plane every 42 minutes. How's that, Mr. Goebbels?
The War Office knew that the RAF was rapidly running out of planes, and it called for a surge in the production rate. There was a shortage of mechanics, so young women were drafted in, and despite some initial male hostility, they proved more than up to the job. In fact, in some factories, female mechanics outperformed the men. Another air raid on London, and this time several pedestrians have been hurt. It was an outrage that provoked the magnificent wrath of Prime Minister Churchill.
If tonight the people of London were asked to cast their votes as to whether a convention should be entered into to stop the bombing of all cities, an overwhelming majority would cry, no, we will mete out to the Germans the measure, and more than the measure, they have meted out to us. We will have no truce or parley with you or the grisly gang who work your wicked will. You do your worst, and we will do our best.
Churchill ordered a raid on Berlin in retaliation.
Well, we've seen a large fire about 25 miles away, and we're running up on Berlin. And we flew, that was in the south side of the city. So we went over and had a look at that. Oh, then you flew across the city? Yes, slap across the center. Altogether, we spent half an hour checking out on the target. And when we definitely identified it, we ran up and dropped our bombs.
The raid on Berlin would have profound consequences. It so infuriated Hitler that he ordered his Air Force to switch its attacks away from airfields and to direct all future bombing at cities. The price was terrible. But the Blitz on London and other cities would give the RAF the precious time it needed to bring more planes and more pilots into service. Meanwhile, as the bombs fell and the fires burned, Londoners turned the tube into a communal shelter.
At 71 stations in the London Underground system, tube trains are bringing refreshments to platform shelterers. Over 120 canteens are being installed. 48 of them are already operating. When the provisions are unloaded, the canteen attendants set up shop while their customers lay down their beds for the night. There may be a blitz going on hundreds of feet overhead, but down below, tens of thousands of shelterers are going to make short work of 250,000 cups of tea and cocoa, to say nothing of buns, cake, apples and chocolate.
The arches, we dream our dreams away. Underneath the arches, on cobblestones we lay. Every night you'll find us tired out and worn, happy when the daylight comes creeping, herald in the dawn, sleeping when it's raining, and sleeping when it's fine.
After the raid, Rosie took her camera to the West End and found a Christopher Wren church that had been disemboweled by German bombs. Now that London's West End was suffering as much damage as the working class East, the indiscriminate bombing strategy began to backfire. It united opposed classes as never before.
Preceded a tour by the King and Queen of bombed areas in London. To Fulham, their Majesties bring a cheery word, and the Queen especially a friendly smile. As they walk with difficulty among the wreckage, they're greatly moved by the wanton havoc wrought by the Hun. At intervals, the royal party halt to have a word with ARP workers, demolition squads and firemen who've done such splendid work at so great a risk. And the Queen smiles again as she insists on shaking the hand of a worker who apologizes for its griminess. Having had their own home bombed, their Majesties speak with understanding and sympathy to those of their subjects who have also fallen victims to Nazi savagery.
It was autumn, almost too late for an invasion by sea. The Nazis threw everything at Britain in what they called the Day of the Eagle. The Germans flew almost 1,500 sorties and lost 46 aircraft to 13. Two days later, they attacked again in even greater force, swooping in from all points of the compass, from airfields in Norway, France, and Denmark. This time, they lost 76 planes to the RAF's 34. Thereafter, German airmen would speak of this day as Black Thursday. While all this violent action was taking place in the skies above them, Britain's Home Guard were perfecting their own, less explosive form of military action, learning the right end from the wrong end of a rifle, learning how to spot an ambush, having a spot of bother with the grenade drill, playing at war under the diminishing threat of the real thing. Then came the day when they triumphed over an imposter of a German tank. And the even more glorious day when their cunningly strung skipping rope first bemused and finally unhorsed a very youthful cavalry corps. And heaven help any approaching stranger who couldn't produce his identity card. That'll do nicely, Your Majesty. The king's better half, meanwhile, was organizing a sewing bee at Buckingham Palace, running up pajamas for wounded soldiers. But soon there would be wounded civilians very close to home.
The martyred city of Coventry. Amid the wholesale wreckage of a noble city, crushed by the force of hundreds of tons of bombs, the steeple of her one-time beautiful 14th century cathedral looks down on a scene of indescribable desolation. Words are hopelessly inadequate to describe the horror and indignation felt all over the civilized world at this wanton devastation. 1,000 citizens of Coventry were killed or maimed by the Nazi disciples of slaughter, who kill mostly for the joy of killing and destroy mostly for the joy of destroying. These are scenes of the butchery at Coventry.
The bombing of Coventry shocked a nation that had become accustomed to atrocity. Winston Churchill, who was deeply moved by the suffering of his fellow citizens, addressed the nation.
It is quite true that I've seen many painful scenes of havoc and of fine buildings and acres of cottage homes blasted into rubble heaps of ruin. But it is just in those very places where the malice of the savage enemy has done its worst, and where the ordeal of the men, women, and children has been most severe, that I found their morale most high and splendid. Indeed, I felt encompassed by an exaltation of spirit in the people which seemed to lift mankind and its troubles above the level of material facts into that joyous serenity we think belongs to a better world than this.
He said to me, he said, "Come along, Mother." He said, "I'll take you down to the town hall." And I said, "What?" He said, "Come along with me and I'll take you down to the town hall." I said, "I don't think it matters, boy." I said, "It's my home and I'm going to stick it." He said, "That's the spirit, that's what I like to hear."
Later, Churchill sailed for the USA, knowing that he needed American support to win the war, and cementing a strong bond with President Roosevelt. But alas, it was Plymouth's turn to be bombed to pieces. Hundreds were killed, 30,000 made homeless. Government observers described the devastation as the worst they'd seen.
And yet they can still make fun and laugh at a man carrying his bed on his back.
The bombing had been going on for nearly a year now. Would it never end? Then, almost as suddenly as it had started, the bombing stopped. The only thing that moved in the sky was a friendly reconnaissance plane. Slowly, the nation was waking up to a staggering, wonderful truth. The bombers had gone for good. Hitler had given up on Britain and was moving eastwards against Russia. So at last the nation could rejoice in the reserved manner for which it was famous. The crowds knew who to thank, the man who'd pulled a tired, dispirited nation to its feet, and by his own courageous example inspired its people to bear themselves with pride and behave with honor. The Battle of Britain had been won. The first step towards victory had been taken. So at war's end, they would march for the last time in Air Force Blue. The men of the youngest service who had written their names in glory. There was Douglas Bader and other Battle of Britain aces talking about their finest hour, when a bunch of brave boys fought a life-and-death struggle in the skies over England. Now they would make one last flight in their old Spitfires. A fly-past in honor of the fallen, the men who'd flown alongside them, but who did not return. The comrades they would never forget.
They'll be with us at Buckingham Palace now. There goes the smoke. Red, white and blue.
In the presence of one of the drama's leading players, the nation would celebrate again their hour of victory and the perilous struggle that opened up the way.